The UN tackling things like poverty and war, that's kind of their thing, right? But AI, artificial intelligence, that feels different, like way different.
It's definitely a sign of the times.
It really is. And it's something we're diving deep into today because you, our amazing listeners, sent us this article all about the UN's proposal for global AI governance. Let me tell you, it's a big one.
Huge, actually. It has the potential to completely reshape, well, everything.
No exaggeration there. But before we even get into the hows and whys of it all, I think it's important to remember that this isn't some far-off sci-fi scenario we're talking about.
Right. This isn't about robots taking over the world. It's about the very real ways AI is already impacting our daily lives right now.
And it's only going to get more intertwined with, well, everything.
Exactly. And that's why the UN is treating this with a real sense of urgency. This isn't something they're taking lightly.
Which makes sense. This is uncharted territory in a lot of ways. So how does, the UN, an organization known for international diplomacy and these really complex agreements, how do they even begin to tackle something as fast evolving and potentially world-changing as AI?
Well, the core of their proposal is to establish a global framework. Think of it like what exists for nuclear power or international aviation.
Okay, so some ground rules that all nations can agree on to ensure AI is developed and used responsibly.
Exactly. It's about setting standards, sharing knowledge, and working together to mitigate risks. Because the potential consequences of getting this wrong are just too great to ignore.
Okay, so a global rule book for AI. That makes sense on some level, but, and this is where it gets really tricky, the article also mentions this whole idea of a technopolar world.
Mhm.
Basically, that it's not just about countries having power anymore, but these tech giants, Google, Microsoft, the ones who are building and controlling a lot of this AI tech.
And they hold immense power. Honestly, it's unprecedented.
Yeah, and it feels like a different kind of power than we've ever seen before. So how can the UN, or anyone really, regulate something this complex and fast-moving when these companies have so much influence?
That is the million-dollar question. And honestly, I don't think anyone has a perfect answer yet.
It does feel like we're kind of making this up as we go along, which is a little unnerving.
It is. But the article doesn't shy away from that reality. It acknowledges the elephant in the room. These companies control the data, and data is the fuel of AI.
Right, it's like the old saying, data is the new oil, except maybe even more valuable than oil at this point.
Absolutely. And their resources, their research capabilities, it dwarfs a lot of nations. It's a whole different ballgame.
Okay, so it's less about traditional geopolitics and more about who controls the algorithms.
In many ways, yes. And this isn't some abstract thing either. It's already influencing your life directly.
Hmm.
Let me ask you, when was the last time you scrolled through social media?
This morning, actually. Why?
Well, what you saw, the posts, the ads, even the order they appeared in, algorithms likely developed by these tech giants, played a huge role in shaping that experience.
It's true. I do love my curated timelines. But you're right, that level of influence is kind of mind-blowing when you actually stop and think about it.
It goes way beyond social media, too. Think about shopping recommendations, financial algorithms, even medical diagnoses in some cases. AI is everywhere.
And it's only going to become more pervasive. So where does that leave us? If these companies have so much control and the UN is worried about AI widening the gap between the haves and the have-nots, are we just kind of stuck?
Well, the UN's hope, and it's a hope shared by many, is that through global cooperation, we can harness the power of AI for good. But it's going to take a massive coordinated effort. Think of it like climate change.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
The impact of AI doesn't stop at any border. What one company or one country does has ripple effects across the globe.
So this has to be a global team effort. No one gets to sit on the sidelines with this one.
Exactly. And it's in everyone's best interest to work together to ensure that AI benefits all of humanity, not just a select few.
Okay, so that's the challenge. But what about the potential? Because the article does talk about the incredible things AI could help us achieve. Disease eradication, climate change solutions, the possibilities seem almost endless.
And they are. The potential of AI to solve some of humanity's biggest problems is truly awe-inspiring.
So how do we balance that potential, that optimism, with these very real concerns about control and ethics and the potential for things to go very wrong?
Well, that's where things get really interesting
Yeah.
and where the UN's proposal starts to lay out some concrete steps. And that's what we're going to dig into right after the break.
All right, so before the break, we were talking about the incredible potential of AI, but also the very real risks if it's not developed and, used responsibly.
And those risks, well, they're not insignificant.
Not at all. So let's dive into those a bit. The article mentioned job displacement as a major concern, and not just for blue-collar jobs this time around.
Exactly. I mean, we've been hearing about automation replacing certain types of jobs for years,
Mm.
but with AI becoming more sophisticated, it's not just about robots on assembly lines anymore.
It's getting a lot harder to predict exactly which jobs might be impacted.
Right, and that's part of what makes it so unsettling. Because as AI systems become more capable of performing complex tasks, even white-collar jobs in fields like, oh, I don't know, finance, law, even medicine, those could see significant changes.
Yeah, that's a big deal. And then there's the whole issue of disinformation and manipulation. I mean,
Right.
we've already seen how quickly misinformation can spread online, even without AI.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg, potentially. Because now, imagine a world where AI makes it even easier to create fake news articles or even videos that are so convincing they're practically indistinguishable from the real thing.
That's kind of terrifying, honestly. How do you even combat that?
It's a huge challenge, and the article really emphasizes this point that the UN sees this as a major threat to global stability and trust. Because if people can't agree on what's true, how can they possibly work together to address any of these other global challenges?
It's almost like AI could end up being this, accelerant for all these existing problems.
Right. And that's why the UN is stressing the need for kind of a paradigm shift, I guess you could say. Less AI arms race and more global AI alliance.
Okay, I like the sound of that better, for sure. But what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, it starts with acknowledging that no single nation can tackle this alone. This needs to be a truly global effort. And one of the key pillars of this collaborative approach is something called capacity building.
Capacity building. Okay, I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure what that means in this context.
So think of it this way. If AI is going to reshape the world, it shouldn't just be a handful of wealthy nations or even powerful tech companies calling all the shots.
Right, that wouldn't exactly be fair.
No, not at all. So capacity building is about making sure that all nations, regardless of their economic standing, have the resources, the education, the infrastructure to be active participants in the AI revolution.
So, a more level playing field when it comes to AI. I like the idea, but how do we actually make that happen?
Well, it's a multi-pronged approach. We're talking about things like funding research initiatives in developing countries, supporting education programs that focus on AI technologies, even things like improving internet access in underserved areas.
Hmm.
It's about fostering a global ecosystem where the benefits of AI are more equitably distributed.
So, less about hoarding AI knowledge and resources and more about sharing them in a way that benefits everyone.
Exactly. And that's a big part of what the UN is trying to encourage with this proposal. Because the alternative, well, it's not a future anyone wants to see.
No, not really. So, capacity building is essential, but it also sounds like a massive undertaking. What are some of the other key elements of the UN's proposal?
Well, in addition to ensuring equitable access to AI, they're also placing a strong emphasis on ethics. Because it's one thing to build these powerful AI systems, but it's another thing entirely to ensure they're used ethically and responsibly.
Yeah, that feels, I don't know, important.
It's absolutely critical. And we're not just talking about preventing those, Hollywood scenarios of AI becoming sentient and deciding to turn on humanity.
Although that would be a bad thing.
Definitely not ideal. But the UN is more focused on addressing the very real ethical dilemmas we're facing right now. Like, for example, how do we make sure that AI systems are perpetuating existing inequalities, things based on race or gender or socioeconomic status?
Right, because we've already seen instances of algorithmic bias, even with relatively basic algorithms. So the potential for harm is only amplified when you're talking about these incredibly complex AI systems.
Exactly. And that's why the UN is urging nations to prioritize ethical considerations from the very beginning of the AI development process.
So baking in safeguards and oversight mechanisms to ensure AI is used for good, not for making existing social problems even worse.
Precisely. And this isn't just about vague principles or lofty aspirations. The article actually outlines several concrete actions the UN is proposing to make ethical AI a reality.
Okay, what? Give us the details. So concrete actions, what's the UN proposing to make ethical AI a reality, not just a talking point?
One really interesting proposal is this idea of a global AI observatory.
A global AI what now?
Observatory. Like imagine a central hub, a global think tank, but with actual influence, that's dedicated to tracking AI developments all over the world.
Okay, so not just monitoring how fast things are advancing, but actually analyzing the potential risks, the ethical implications, all of that.
Exactly. It would be a platform for international collaboration, for sharing information and best practices. Because right now, so much of what's happening with AI is happening behind closed doors, either in private companies or in individual countries that are kind of doing their own thing.
Right, it's a lot of silos. So this observatory would be a way to get a more holistic view of like the big picture of AI and where it's headed.
Precisely. And
Hmm.
hopefully help us anticipate problems before they arise, rather than always playing catch up.
Makes sense. What else? What else is on the UN's ethical AI to-do list?
Well, in addition to the observatory, they're also proposing a global AI ethics council.
Okay, so if the observatory is about gathering all the information, the ethics council is about like interpreting it, figuring out what it all means.
Exactly. This council would be responsible for, like, actually developing ethical guidelines for AI,
Mm.
advising governments on policy decisions, mediating international disputes, that kind of thing. Think of it as, like, the ethical compass guiding the development and use of this insanely powerful technology.
And this wouldn't just be like a room full of tech people,
Oh,
right?
absolutely not. The article was very clear about that. They're talking about bringing together ethicists, philosophers, social scientists, people who can provide a much broader range of perspectives.
Because if we've learned anything from history, it's that technological progress without ethical considerations can go very, very badly.
Yeah, there's no shortage of cautionary tales there. And to the UN's credit, they seem to get that. They're not approaching AI as just another technology to be managed. They see it as something that has the potential to fundamentally reshape what it means to be human.
Which is kind of a heavy thought when you really let it sink in. So they're talking about global cooperation, ethical frameworks, capacity building. It's a lot to process.
It really is, and it's going to be a long and complex process. There's no doubt about that. But the UN seems to understand that to build a future where AI truly benefits everyone, we need to get this right.
And that we need to start thinking about it now, not 5 years from now or 10 years from now, because who knows where we'll be by then if we don't.
Exactly. And the good news is this conversation is starting to happen. People are waking up to the potential benefits and risks of AI, and that's a good thing. Because ultimately, the future of AI is not something that should be decided by a handful of tech companies or governments.
It's something we all have a stake in, and hopefully this deep dive has given everyone listening a better understanding of what's at stake and how they can be a part of shaping this future. So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep those questions coming. The future of AI might be uncertain, but it's definitely a conversation worth having.